Feral Theatre and Yale University acknowledge that Indigenous peoples and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scaticoke, Golden Hill Pagosset, Nihantic, the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples have stewarded, through generations, the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honour and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land.
Hi, I'm going to start by saying thank you, and I'm still very much absorbing what we all experienced. What I'm going to offer as my initial response is some stream of consciousness writing that I did as the piece was progressing. I care a lot about the environment. I'm very aware of myself in the environment. I'm not an environmental expert, so I see myself as responding in a performative manner, and therefore that's what I will do. Okay. As I sat down, I heard, "I've been told I might experience some sand." A body, a part, hangs from a scaffold. A hanging, I think of Susanna Martin, my ancestor, hung as a witch. Double doors open. The white room shifts from a gallery to a drawing room. Layers of history of this space pull back, sit side by side. The land acknowledgement reaches even further back, before these structures, before the hanging. You think you really know me? We are on a dance floor. Dance with a piece of meat. Can it hear? Does it have rhythm? A wallflower. A scaffold flower? Comfort girls. Everyone wants a dance, a piece, a pinch, an embrace. Who can get closest? Who can get a good grip and hang on? Sand begins to spill, the Caucasian chalk circle. Who really loves this body? Does sand soothe or bury? The body finds its own rhythm, its own flow, its own spinning centrifugal energy. Animate, bleeding out. First attempt to stop. Second attempt. Can this be stopped? Stay clean for God's sake. You know these pants are meant to last. Sand down a dress, a sleeve, a cleavage. My daughter's hair has had sand in it for months, I think. I scratch her head as she goes to sleep, and it goes under my fingernails. A new sculpture. A thigh, a shoe, bail it out, post-bail, sand flies, falls, gravity has its way. Nothing to see here, grace, until grace becomes too much, and again, gravity, no grace, no, gravity has its way. Still, the sand, and only our hands now, a skirt for a bucket for a skirt. Labor begets, begot, with child, sand baby, sand in my baby's hair, release. Sand can't break, not like water does. Grief, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I can't read that. Lifeless, dry like this, lifeless. Hold up the scaffold to hold her up, an ancient structure of mourning. Mourning becomes her, becomes heavy, becomes gravity, becomes sand. Reverse direction, stop the flow, or just make it quicker. There's mercy in swiftness, in easing the inevitable. I've been told I might experience some sand. A hard line to follow, linear loss, sands of time. It's not that time passes so fast, it's that it only goes in one direction that seems so impossible. My children. Daddy, how are glasses made? My brother stalls at bedtime. Hold the changing form, feet buried in the sand. These are the days of our lives, stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, then knock down like so many sandcastles. Aging happens. Have you tried the sand scrub? Exfoliant, a blessing. Leap, wrap, resist gravity, grace, gravity. A circle, a sun of sand. Water makes a dough. An invitation to play, to shape. We've all loved and lost, made and remade, seen up close and far away, misrecognized sand for snow, foreground for background, strangers for friends. Liquid solidarity in a paper cup. With heat, it will rise again. I've been told I might experience some sand.
Thank you. I want to thank the leaves and the branches and the things, and I love you. Thank you for bringing them along and working with them so well, and the sand, all that sand and the metal, and you, of course, for telling us a story together with all of us here. Very grateful for that. I was thinking about I say I never ask artists what they meant because it's hard to answer the question. And Elise was saying to me, because she studies this stuff, that everybody makes a narrative. And narrative is one of the make narratives, and I was certainly making some as I was watching it from the lens of my expertise and my history in the work, whatever. And narrative is one of the central challenges we face in fixing climate change, in the sense that some of you may already be feeling this in the air for the last 5 or 10 years. We are understanding more and more that we can't really embrace this problem or address it and solve it from the perspective of an individual idea of a story, from being disconnected from the fact that branches tell stories and sand is a character. I think these days when I see a box of blueberries, I think of how many blueberries there are in the world. There's so many blueberries. So many grains of sand, right? There's a lot of that out there. It's amazing what there is in the world that we experience and we survive on and live with. So that, I think, is for me, my first reaction was to be grateful that you had brought partners to this performance, and that I would see them also performing in the work you did. I didn't know it was sand until the bag started to leak, but that was really cool too. So that's, I guess, really my primary reaction. And I did do this once before, commented on a performance once before in about 2004, a dance company in San Francisco. I was on stage afterwards as well. And so, and I heard that you all have been doing this work about 20 years, so I would love to hear how you got started, and what brought you together and has kept you going through all this. So that's it. Yeah.
Well, how did we get started? We met at a puppet theatre, a small puppet theatre, but a very famous puppet theatre in North London called the Little Angel Puppet Theatre. And I was the technical manager of the theatre, and you were both puppeteers. And then soon after that, we started living together. And we used to make little shows on our kitchen table for our friends, and then we started Feral Theatre, and anyone who would watch, yeah. And we all carried on working in theatre, and we all had children, and then we set up Feral Theatre in 2007. But I think all of our work always had environmental themes.
Yeah, well, our first project as Feral Theatre was we wanted to make local seasonal theatre. So we set ourselves a year-long project to make work that explored and responded to the Wheel of the Year, and all of the pieces were outdoors apart from one, I think. And we worked at a local food project with people who also worked there and visitors there. So it was quite integrated with the very local place, and it was what we wanted was to make work that worked on a range of levels. So it would be good for children as well as adults. So so the humour and the ritual worked on different levels, and then from that, in 2011, there was, or 2000, I think 2009, 2010, there was some, well, actually it was the COP conferences of parties, the UN Framework for Climate Convention, Framework on Climate, was happening in Copenhagen, and there was a really sort of stark sense of the difficulty for radical or youth-led or grassroots or intersectional anti-racist environmental voices, or curious experimental thinkers to kind of penetrate the echelons of power, I think there was a real sense of exclusion and disillusionment and grief, and the way that we started to want to talk about the issues that we were exploring was more around actually kind of confronting feelings like alienation and despair. And so we kind of butt through the lens of ritual. So we got funding and made a project called The Funeral for Lost Species, and it was set in a graveyard. It was set in the Celestial Garden of Remembrance for Lost Species, and it was quite a big participatory project. And from that, at that point, I don't know quite why, in 2010, 2011, it seemed like there was quite a lot of stuff happening in the States as well as in Europe, a lot of stuff around actually memorializing biodiversity loss and kind of trying to kind of get our heads around this hyper object, which is species extinction. So leading from that theatre piece, which was a kind of extended ritual, which we can talk more about if need be, there was a kind of invitation to people to make their own rituals around biodiversity loss. And that's been a whole huge journey since 2009, 2010, which we can talk about more if we need to. But our own creative work and our thinking has changed so much in the intervening 10 years since the Funeral for Lost Species. And it's changed with the environmental movement. It's developed with the language around queering and actually centering justice in environmental languaging, centering Indigenous and voices of colour. And it's been a real kind of amazing learning curve. And anti-capitalist, yeah. So really kind of quite chastening as well. And yeah, but our own performance practice has became much more sort of bitty as we moved to different places. We've made some films about exploring things like xenophobia or othering, and I'm thinking of the Round Gobi project. But this invitation to come to Yale is something that we were so thrilled about, and this piece is something that Rachel was gestating for many years in a context of a lack of funding, a lack of resources and time. So it's really been an extraordinary gift to us as a company to bring us together in a supportive and sort of intellectually connected environment to make this piece. Yeah. Do you want to talk about The Last Dance? Its inception.
I can do. Do we want to respond? Okay. Well, actually, what I would like to say is that when I first met these two in that little old puppet theatre in London, there was an instant attraction between the three of us. You know, when you meet people and you're like, wow. Right. But I thought they were mad. So I wanted to be a really serious physical theatre maker. And they're like, oh, this species, that species, I know, let's dress up as the whatever, some Latin name, and let's walk around a park. And I was like, this is not serious theatre. And I felt sorry for them. And I thought, and I remember saying to them, that sounds really interesting. I don't think I would perform in that. I think maybe I should direct it, because I really thought I could fix them. Right? That's the truth. And then actually they ended up fixing me. That's the truth. Because at the time it was not cool to make theatre about these themes. It wasn't. You didn't get funding. People looked down on you. So I kind of resisted as long as I could, and eventually I gave in and realised that this is exactly what we should be making theatre about. So that was kind of my journey with these two. And this connection between us, I think, is a really special one. So, and I think that's really, really important in terms of us being an ensemble, because we perform with this connection. That is also what you see in the space there. And I think that's very important in terms of this theme of connection and the interpersonal and communitas. These things are really important, and that's something we also represent in our work, and something like in the end when you all came into the space, something we often have things like this in the end of our pieces where we encourage the audience to come and eat something with us or create something with us. So, yeah.
If I could just say that your story, it recapitulates the domination of an individual narrative in literature, in the sense that people in India and Africa, writers in other cultures, for 200 or 300 years were ridiculed for talking about trees, and it was driven. Their narratives of everything else were driven out by fashion, by the Western aesthetic. It's just like you were saying to them, "What are you doing? You're crazy, right? Why would you not represent that?" And that was, in a lot of authors in those cultures now are writing about how that that fashion was so damaging that we were at risk of losing so much.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to hear about process and collaboration. I am teaching a class on collaboration, and actually 2 of my teaching fellows are here as well. And also on the question of puppetry, actually, they also do a lot of puppetry. So I it makes so much sense that you have your origin, or that your origin point was a puppet theater, and the relationship between I suppose agentic, animate creatures and ones that become more animate with our help, or they become entertaining to us when they are animated or something like that. I'd be just really curious to hear how you engage with your. I love how you referred, Michael, to them as collaborators. That you got to meet the collaborators of the seeds and the branches and the sand, but how you engage with your collaborators. I mean, how do you start with the collaboration with these what we typically call inanimate objects that, of course, had a lot of flow and had a lot of there was a lot of movement actually that you put into motion that wasn't always. In fact, sometimes you couldn't stop it, right? It was animated and then couldn't stop. But just how it, I don't know, how it speaks to you, how it moves with you, and where, and my, at least I think somewhere when I read something about the process of this performance that it came out of a lot of experimentation, and some of it was improvisatory. I mean, I guessed it must have been. You couldn't have choreographed which grain of sand came next, right? So there was some improvisation in that. But I would love to hear about that in relation to this piece and any of the others.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this, about the animate, inanimate, and really that relates to what you said about authors from the majority world, the global majority, in that, in Western culture we have this kind of really clear separation between things, and I think we all feel like that's very problematic in lots of ways. This kind of separation between human and animal, separation between animate and inanimate, and I think there's certain authors and writers and thinkers that we've been quite heavily influenced by, like Donna Haraway, who talks about this kind of stuff a lot. And Catherine Youssef, I don't know if she's big over here, she wrote a book called A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, and she talks a lot about the material and the body and the animate and the inanimate in really, really interesting ways. And also David Abram, who I think is American, so you probably know of his work, and he talks about a mountain having a gaze. So when you look at a mountain, the mountain is looking back at you, and that all of those ideas I think kind of filter into our work, and there was something I think really beautiful about filling a bag full of sand, and then in fact we'd never call it a bag. We very rarely call it a bag. And we had a conversation about, what do we call it? We call it the sculpture, or we quite often call it the body. The body, yeah. And so, it's really I think the language around it is really interesting as well. That it felt wrong to call it a bag. Do you want to say? Yeah, so just pass it along.
And the sand itself, we were very curious about where its life before coming into the room, and it feels really important to research and try to understand a bit about the processes that bring that material, that partner, to this dance and this relationship with us. And it's extracted, it's silica sand, it's the most common material in the Earth's crust, but it's mined, and it's mined in Texas, this sand, and we think it's a sort of side hustle for a fracking sand company, because sand is used in fracking. So we have a complicated relationship with this material. And it feels important to look at that in quite an unflinching way as we touch it. But there's something that happens through the literal touching of it. I feel what happens next after tonight, what happens to it matters. It's not just to be swept away and put in the bin. Which so many things are, like so much just gets put in the bin. It feels really like it's critical importance to me personally that sand is mindfully, it goes on somewhere. Yeah. And I guess a ritual like this, where we can sit with the sand and just sort of settle in, particularly with Sohail's amazing music, which was so contemplative and expansive, gives us an opportunity to open up into some of for me, the enormity of the feelings, the complicated feelings of the processes that are underway in this room, and in some way to grieve for the sand, because obviously mining and these extractive industries are these kind of primary drivers of ecological collapse. So this really feels like an opportunity to kind of sit with paradox, because at the same time as grieving, there's this beautiful process and relationships and new thoughts and ways of being with it that emerge.
I want to talk a bit about attunement, because for me this is something that I work with a lot in terms of a kind of visceral relationship with the sand as a kind of partner in performance. So there's something about this idea of attunement and attuning, just like we do with each other, with the objects. And in puppetry, of course, you have to attune to whatever the object is, and kind of it finds you as much as you find it, in a way. So there is this intimacy with, in my head as a performer with the sand. First of all, I thought, brilliant idea, this is amazing. Wow, this is so good. We're gonna do this, and then then the talk about the sand, and then the reality of it hit me. Fuck. This is horrible. It's going to be horrible. We're going to be rolling around in sand. We're going to get it in our eyes. It's going to hurt. It's going to be tough. I was like, what have I done? And then we fully committed to it. So that was, as a performer, I'm like, how are we going to do this? But my journey with that sand was incredible, because it was not horrible working with that sand. It was really sensual, incredibly sensual. And I definitely fell in love with it. As a performer, and the amount of things that sand, how it spoke to me, it was like this conversation, and constantly discovering, oh, you're this, oh, you're that. And even in this performance here, as a performer, those discoveries were still happening. They were still happening. So that for me, that was the relationship with the sand, and its gift to me as well. Something about that process is healing always, I think, when you're scared of something and then you face it. But as a performer, for me, it's always about attuning. I'm attuning to the object, and that is definitely what we learnt from puppetry, for sure.
Okay. Can I step in here and see if anybody in the audience wants to jump in the conversation?
Hi, thank you so much for a really wonderful performance. My question is about the concept of what some people call climate grief. Because when I hear people talk about that, they often talk about it in terms of a problematic, right? Grief on the one hand is this visceral, personal thing, but the climate crisis is this hyper object that's like very big and hard to conceptualize. But as performers, right, you're, I think, very successfully embodying this idea of climate grief. So if you could just speak a little bit about what it is to embody grief for something that is so big, like how you thought through that. Yeah, thank you.
I think when we were devising this piece, which was only a few weeks ago, when we actually got together in a room with the sculpture and with the sand, I think we talked about grief on a number of levels. So we did talk about climate grief, but we also talked about our own grief. And we've all suffered quite big losses in our lives. So I think that sort of tapping into that personal grief and thinking about, sorry, I'm struggling to articulate this, but yeah, the links between those things, like how those, like what's the intersection between your personal grief and climate grief, and you know, these different kinds of losses. I think we sort of talked about that, but also talked about it through play and through, I think sometimes I talk about us talking about things, but we're not always having a conversation about it. We have a lot of conversations as well, but sometimes we're talking about it through our bodies and through moving around. And I think that all of those things were kind of, you know, for me anyway, it was meshed together. And sometimes even in the show tonight, I was thinking about personal grief. You know, I'd have moments where I'd be like, oh God, this is like, I mean, I wasn't thinking about it in that kind of way, you know, linear way, but yeah, just the sort of, I would sort of go back to moments in my life where there's been a terrible loss, a terrible moment of loss. So yeah, for me, it was sort of meshed together. Oh, the stages of grief.
Yeah. But yeah, I think yeah, we learnt, we found it very helpful to refer to the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross with terminally ill people facing their own you know, definite death, and her students and collaborators who developed her model to be more inclusive of people working through trauma and grief and continuing to live, which felt that. So basically, there's the 5 stages, which may or possibly all know about, and then they include anger, denial, panic, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then in the case of continuation, there's this upward turn and the kind of spiraling, and you know, and that's really what's kind of happening as we're sifting through the transformation from our dance partner, our love object, into a totally new landscape, that new possibility arises that we couldn't have imagined before, facing the loss and a whole new kind of complex emotional terrain. And it feels important, you know, always to think about grief as part of a whole complex world of feelings and responses to environmental change, which must welcome joy, community, rage, laughter, bewilderment, disaffection, you know, cynicism, that they all have a place. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Congratulations, I thought it was an extremely thought-provoking and very moving piece. I wanted to ask about your name, because there's a way, I mean, I felt, part of the participatory element, I agree with what you said, that, you shouldn't ask artists what they mean because it means whatever it means to everybody who's there. But I felt like the participatory part was a way of invoking our own complicity in climate destruction. And yeah, we're all playing in the sand together, as it were. But I wondered if the feral part of your title is also a kind of provocation to think about, these judgments that we make. That feral has a negative connotation, and yet what we're all needing to do is to kind of rewild, in a sense. And so I just wondered if you could speak about that.
Do you want me to speak about it? Well, it's a contested name, and we sort of
We're constantly thinking we're going to change our name.
we just can't change it.
It's really hard when you establish something.
Yeah. I personally love it and find it aspirational. Others dislike it intensely. You do.
I think it's a great title.
I'm curious about feral as an aspiration, as something that may have been pejorative, but actually is probably important and required. But I think that you've picked up on there are tensions around privilege, positionality, and authenticity for us, I think, in terms of claiming it. But yeah, I like the idea that's a provocation. Thanks.
I think we also, Persephone came up with the name.
No, we both did.
Oh, did you? Okay. And I think the reason that we liked it, and really the sort of meaning, came from this idea of wild being sort of like unattainable in some way, or at least the sort of to strive for wildness. It just makes me think of the kind of national parks movement in America, and the kind of like, this is the wild place, and all the people are going to get moved out of there because they're humans, so they're not wild, and we're going to put a big fence around it, and that's the wild bit. And we felt like that is not something that we wanted to aspire to. And the idea of rewilding, it's like this idea of going back to something, whereas where we was getting really excited about Donna Haraway and staying with the trouble and let's just...
Also, working in peripheral spaces, unfunded, working in allotments and car parks and people's front rooms. It was a feral theatre, and it was kind of, claiming that actually you don't have to have funding, you don't have to have a studio, you don't have to have, whatever, a website, all the things that it was just like, let's, in snatches of time, and that's always how it's been for our work. It's possible to do it, and you don't have to be invited in. Yeah, and the idea of the rough theatre too, where you just turn up with your bodies and invite people. Yeah.
Have you brought it into schools, what we would call high schools in this country, where younger people, say to drama clubs, so that they could experience it, and then have a discussion about what it is you're doing? I think it would be really interesting, instructive, just wonderful to bring it to a younger audience than...
Do you think this piece? Do you think this piece?
I'm sorry.
This piece?
This piece, or any of your other pieces. I mean, you're talking about drawing rooms and playgrounds, and I'm just wondering about people who are focused on, not necessarily this piece, but all of the work that you've been doing for a decade or more, bring it to other young drama.
We actually started, because when Feral started we had babies, so we we tended to make, it was quite child-centred initially, and as our babies grew up, because it was wonderful, and sure, I mean, it would be great. We've created proposals. We all work with children a lot anyway, so in different ways we are working with children.
But I'm talking about slightly older,
Adolescents.
that might have a different kind of emotional, intellectual response.
The Lost Species Day invitation and activities have really been warmly received in schools, and are much more easily taken on by class teachers and groups in terms of being able to. Incidentally, we're going to do some in our workshop tomorrow. If anybody would like to join us, we'll be exploring some of the themes together, making smaller offerings and responses. We've done quite a lot of DIY, rough, little projects with encouraging children to make and talk about some of the themes, but we haven't taken this to schools.
I'm just thinking we're here in New Haven and you're at Yale University, but at Hill House High School, it would be a completely different audience.
It would be fascinating. Yeah, but we're leaving on Sundays.
No, I understand. We're not talking
But yeah,
about
yeah,
for this trip.
I would imagine they would laugh a lot more than we did. I actually thought of Charlie Chaplin a lot when I was looking at these. You struck a really interesting figure, and also just the absurdity of the set containing the sand.
Yes.
Yeah.
We all trained as clowns, actually, so
Okay.
it's hard to keep that out once you have that training. It creeps in.
Teresa, Evan, do you have a microphone back there?
I can, my voice can project. You actually touched already on what I was going to ask about, namely the annual Day of Remembrance for Lost Species. If I remember correctly, you were behind the initial creation of that day more than 10 years ago now. Would you say a word about it, please?
Yes, we co-founded Remembrance Day for Lost Species with a few other individuals, and the Life Cairn and Extinction Witness, based in the US. Is it just those three? Yeah. And are you aware of the initiative? Are you aware of the project? Yeah. So it's a year. It's on the 30th of November every year, and it's an invitation to people to create some kind of ritual. Normally that's how it works, but people have written articles as well. It's really anything you want to do. It's very open and non-prescriptive, but often there's a ritual element, so it's to remember lost species. But it's interestingly, the project and its evolution really sort of reflects our evolution as artists. So it started out as every year we would choose a species to remember. So there was one about the passenger pigeon and one about Stella's sea cow, and it was quite nerdy and natural. We are total natural history nerds, me and Persephone. And then I think, I'm not quite sure at what point or what really prompted this, but yeah, we just sort of started reading about anti-racist practice, basically, and the sort of, inextricable, sorry, not sure what word I said then, but I just like to say it's quite hard to be like intellectual after doing a performance like that. It's like a different part of your brain goes, no, don't make me talk. But anyway, yeah, the links between colonialism and capitalism and climate change and how these things are sort of so bound up together. Yes, and this idea of thinking of one, individual species and making it all about that, how that very much sort of played into older ideas of natural history and the idea of separation. And so we wrote an essay to collectively in 2018, I want to say, something like that, about how we wanted to do things differently, and we didn't want to concentrate on individual species anymore, and we wanted to bring...
Cause harm.
Yeah, we didn't want to cause harm, yeah. And we felt like we were, that our work was part of a white supremacist, project around paradigm, in terms of environmentalism, white environmentalism, and the problems around that. And we wanted to strive to do things differently, and and that's, I wouldn't say we are perfect in any way in that endeavour, but we're
but also
trying.
Now I feel like we've really relaxed. I feel like I've personally really let go, because I found that was alienating for a lot of people who just found it quite confusing and hurtful, bringing up a lot of stuff around people who wanted to simply, for example, go for a walk with waders, go and find the shorebirds. And we were saying you need to make sure, think about access and inclusion, you think about whose voices you're foregrounding, learn about the ancestral history of the land. It's really intense. Yeah. And I think that quite a number of people kind of bounced away from the initiative, and hopefully they're coming back, or, it just felt like it was important to do that, for us to do that work.
Yeah,
but
we went quite hard in one direction,
yeah.
didn't we? And
Which is normal.
Yeah,
that's
it's a developmental thing, isn't it?
process.
Yeah.
You start really full on, and then you realise that that's a feature of white supremacy.
Perfectionism.
And trying to get it all right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a feature. Perfectionism, also a feature of white supremacy, right? And it never ends. It doesn't ever end. The mistakes are always. It's a mess. And in our lifetime, it won't not be a mess. So just like in that performance, it's something about getting dirty, getting your feet, getting in there, getting in the mud.
That you can be complicit, and also you can be complicit in harm and also part of healing at the same time. It's about paradox and staying with it, and that's our kind of motto that we took from Donna Haraway, the book Staying with the Trouble. It's just like sitting in the muck, basically, and not flip.
And being okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's so much more we could say, but we are past time, and I think we should probably wrap this up. So I want to, can we once again thank